Welcome to 4 Questions. Here at Blackmore 4, we're fortunate enough to engage with incredible business leaders across various industries and sometimes even continents. However, today we're excited to talk to Ealing-based businesswoman Rachel Miller. Rachel is an international internal communication consultant, trainer, and mentor who helps internal communicators to thrive. She has quite a number of accolades and awards to her name, including being named as one of the UK's leading social business influencers and recognised as a top UK female blogger, according to eConsultancy. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Right, so let's get into our 4 questions. And 4 questions, or question 1 goes like this. Rachel, given your rich expertise in communication, it's no surprise that you will advocate for the importance in leveraging off this skill in the business environment. But can you tell us why it's important to effectively communicate as a leader?
I believe you can't be a great leader without being a brilliant communicator. If you think about the best manager that you've ever had, or the best leader or CEO in your organization, I'm sure what made them really stand out was their ability to communicate. So not just communicating well with you in terms of sharing company updates or what's going on as context setting in the organization, but also the personal side. So how good they are at drawing out your views, listening to your questions, being empathetic. All of those skills are absolutely vitally important. In order to be a brilliant leader, you have to be a brilliant communicator.
Sure, that's so interesting, because I've just for a moment thought about people that have inspired me or made an impact on me, and you're absolutely right. They were all good at communicating.
But the opposite is true. If you can't be a great leader if you're poor at communication. So if you think of the worst boss that you've had or the worst manager that you've worked with, probably what they were bad at was their communication skills. It's absolutely critical. It's a superpower for a leader if you can nail how to communicate effectively, and that's in a two-way mindset. So not just broadcasting a one-way monologue, but focusing on dialogue, on listening to employees' voices, amplifying their views, and genuinely listening. We all know the difference between someone who's pretending to listen to you and they're actually not. I think the best leaders are the ones who It's a really common trait, because you can see it instantly. You can tell if someone's not really listening to you. And if that's your leader, if that's someone who's in a position of authority inside an organization, that's a really core skill to get right, because you can feel when the opposite is true. You can feel when they're not great at communicating.
Sure, that is so true. All right, question 2, Rachel. How do you know if a leader or a leadership team has the capability required to communicate effectively?
I think observation. So if I'm working with an organization and working with leaders, and I often get called in when there's a problem, where there's a feeling like leaders aren't communicating very well. So I will go in and work with internal communicators and help them discover the evidence. So the best way for me to know whether a leader is good or bad at communication is by gathering your evidence. So looking for feedback, looking for anecdotal evidence from employees. And often it's about levels of trust. So if leaders are poor at communicating, then you'll hear that in rumours and suspicion and a feeling that they're not credible and accurate and reliable as leaders. So you'll see that it's very clear. If you just ask people, how would you describe this leader to me? How good are they at communicating? And the feedback that you hear back often is linked to trust. So if they're poor at communicating, and that's things like doing all employee meetings or town hall meetings where leaders will stand up and communicate. If employees feel like they're hiding something, or they're not being transparent, leaders are deliberately hiding something, it has a real ripple effect in the morale, the motivation, the credibility rating of leaders. So the best way to know whether it's working or not is to gather your evidence, to observe leaders, and back up your gut feel by asking employees for their feedback and impressions too.
Yeah, okay. Number 3, what specific business issues are the result of ineffective communication? So what yeah, sort of stories can you think of? No names, but yeah, what's been the result of ineffective communication?
We've got a case in the news just this week with P&O ferries, where, what's top of mind there for me in observing what's been going on. I believe what happens inside an organisation is reflected outside. So if you have a toxic culture, it will seep out. If you have a positive culture, that will seep out too. And most of that is fueled by communication or lack of. So the ripple effect of getting communication wrong is that people don't trust your leaders. They choose to leave an organisation if it feels like everything's being secret and people aren't communicating in a very transparent way. Then employees are the first to know that, so they won't choose to stay. They won't choose to stick around if there's an integrity gap. And I look for that in my work, and that's, is there a gap between what we say and what we do as an organisation? And you need there to be no gap in that integrity. What happens inside should be reflected outside. What you're saying externally about your organisation and the way you work, if you say things like, we value our people, do you really internally? Because your people are the first to know that. So the business impact of poor communication is far reaching. It means you can't recruit in the right way. It means you can't retain your employees in the right way. And it means that the employee experience isn't great either. So you're not encouraging your people to thrive by creating a culture or an environment where we're open, there's trust, we want to listen to your views and voices. You can feel when that's not in place. So, and it goes beyond that in terms of impacting productivity as well, for example. So if your people aren't feeling very engaged, very inspired, very motivated, they're probably not putting in discretionary effort and they're not feeling very valued. So funnily enough, productivity is not going to be great and happiness levels aren't going to be great. So it's a long list. It's a really, really long list in terms of the impact.
Yeah. One thing I've learned from this conversation, Rachel, is, I've always just thought communication is communication, the way I articulate myself. But from what you're telling me, it is multifaceted. I mean, it's not just communicating, it's active listening, it's your brand, it's the way in which your employees, they're productive, as you've just said, it's their well-being, it's how they communicate to clients. It's massive. It's quite mind-blowing. It's not just communication, but it's just so broad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're working as an internal communicator, there's never a dull moment. I think what we're good at is doing the listening piece and helping it make sense. So helping an organization make sense of itself. And you do through things like tone of voice, through how you describe your culture. So the way we do things around here. It's a fascinating field to work in. I absolutely love it. And you can see the impact of when you get it right. And you can also feel the impact of when it's not done well. I think there's an important mindset for me that there's a quote by a journalist called Sidney Harris from the 1940s. And he said, information is giving out and communication is getting through. In my experience, most organizations are focused on information giving out. It's really powerful. It's quite simple, but it's really powerful because what we focus on is, I've sent an email, I've communicated. Yeah. No, you've just done, yeah, tick, there we go. But you haven't, you've done the information given out. Communication getting through is, does it make sense? What was the call to action? What did people do, say, think, feel as a result of your internal communication? If you know how you wanted or needed them to behave, did they do that? So sending an email is rarely good enough when it comes to good, effective communication. And particularly thinking about leadership communication, if your leaders think they're sending out a very corporate, missive that goes out on a Friday afternoon and they think that's their way of communicating, it's not good enough unless it's two-way, unless they're inviting questions, having discussions. Rarely is it enough for a leader just to send an email blast because it's broadcast, it's one way, it's very monologue based, not dialogue. And that's the sweet spot for good, effective communication from a leadership perspective, or any perspective, frankly. It's the communication getting through. Are we really listening? Are we really acting on the views and voices of our people? Because if you're not, everyone switches off. If you're just being communicated at, not for and with.
Yeah. Wow, that is so valuable, not just in business, but as a parent, in a partnership. It's, very, very valuable. All right, Rachel, it's time for Bingo Buzz. Are you ready?
I am. I'm curious what's in this box.
So some of them can be quite controversial questions, but there's no right or wrong. We just want to hear your opinion and have a good chat. So yeah, our bingo buzz question number 4 is, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, it generally is really just a long piece of paper. All right, Rachel, do leaders need to have an appetite for change?
Oh, that's a good question. I think whether they have one or not, there's no choice really. You have to be open to change because that's the only constant that we have in business. So some leaders love change and they love getting stuck in and they do a really good job. Other leaders are more hesitant because perhaps they haven't had to communicate restructures or difficult change before. We use the term change so broadly. I did a session with some clients recently and we mapped out 27 different things that fall under that change word. So whether it's a merger, an acquisition, whether it's furloughing, whether it's all sorts, rebranding, new change in leadership, products, services, location, that's all change. So we know that that's a constant inside our organizations. So as a leader, I believe you don't have an option to not be good at change. You have to get stuck in because your people expect you to guide them through change. So you need to help it make sense for them, show up, be visible. So you can't say, I haven't got an appetite for it, I'm just going to check out and leave it to someone else, because you won't get through the change. You won't mature through a transition to get to whatever the future state is, new products, services, leadership, brand, etc. So don't let them get away with it.
I would argue with you because I agree with so much of what you just said. I mean, who survives in current day that doesn't enjoy change? I mean, we don't have to love it, but I think we have to be comfortable.
I think so. I think you have to, particularly if it's difficult change, if you're, as a leader, if you can communicate with compassion and empathy, you know what's top of mind, you're tapped into the sentiment of your organization, you have great relationships, even if you're communicating very difficult news and messages, all of the relationship building that you have when you're not really up against it, when it's just day-to-day business as usual, pays dividends when you're in a change environment, because that currency of trust that you build up is absolutely invaluable when it comes to change communication, because your people are far more likely to listen to you, far more likely to trust you. If you just show up when there's change and you don't already have that trusting relationship in place, it makes the communication a heck of a lot harder. So you have to get stuck in as a leader. You can't leave it to somebody else.
Yeah. Rachel, it's been such a pleasure hosting you today on 4 questions. Thank you so much for your insights and for teaching me a thing or two about communication. And yes, go well. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.